The People's Business is made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
A very good evening to you. This is The People's Business, and I'm your presenter, Ryan Broom. Our topic tonight, climate change, the heat, and you. And to help us do that, we have an esteemed panel. Dr. Kenneth, Connell, Deputy Dean, Recruitment and Outreach, Faculty of Medical Sciences, UWI Campbell Campus. Dr. Kirk Douglas, Director, Center for Biosecurity Studies at the UWI. Dr. Mike Campbell, Clinical and Behavioural Psychologist, Deputy Dean, Research and Postgraduate Studies, Faculty of Medical Sciences at the UWI. We're back with the opening comments after this break. Welcome back to this edition of the People's Business Live. The topic tonight, climate change, the heat, and you. And of course, lately, everybody would know we've been having some hot temperatures, and climate change has been identified as one of, if not the main cause. It's affected everything from schools, agriculture, everyday people, and encountering things like heat stroke. And we've been hearing a lot from the Met Office in terms of what the heat from their perspective in terms of the weather side. But now we're going to get a medical side and a more scientific side really of how these things affect us as people and all the things we do every day. And I'm just going to throw it out to my guests now to give their impressions of where we are. We've never seen, I understand we had record temperatures recently recorded. We haven't seen heat like this before. Tell us what's the big picture in terms of what we're experiencing. Dr. Connell, start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan, and thanks for having the UE team on the program. So it's no surprise. Outside is hot. It's hotter than we have experienced certainly in my lifetime. One person on a social media page actually posted these are probably still the coolest days of our future. So it might get hotter as things progress if climate change has its impact. And various organizations, as you mentioned, in health, and including some centers in the university, but also the Heart and Stroke Foundation, the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, they've all given advisories on how to stay cool and things to do during the heat wave. And that's the individual response to the heat wave. Things like drinking more water, staying in a cool place, like we are now, most of us in air-conditioned rooms, and trying to change our activity patterns to adjust to the extreme heat. But in a broader sense, there's some more structural things that kind of stand outside of all of our control. For instance, how do we make transportation more heat resilient? How do we make a health system more heat resilient? Education, and then there are the long-term impacts on health. Many of us are familiar with the effects of dehydration when we don't consume enough water, but there's several other health issues that we will delve into in the program, including cardiovascular health, or a direct impact of the environmental changes. So those are my opening shots, CPL style, and I will hand over to my colleagues.
Okay, Dr. Douglas, you can go next.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and good night to Barbados. Well, Dr. Connell, the heat is obviously with us. It is palpable. We can feel it every day. And the question is, what other impact is the heat having on us, and what risk in the future will we experience due to this increased temperature? We've heard of global warming. Now we are actually feeling global warming. The melting of the ice caps, leads to sea level rise, and disproportionately, countries in the equatorial regions are seeing those marked increase in sea level rise, especially smaller and developing states within that equatorial region. And that has implications for our water quality, water quantity as well, and then the risk for infectious diseases or communicable diseases. And I think most persons will be aware that Barbados is currently undergoing a dengue epidemic or outbreak at present, and heat also impacts the life cycle of mosquitoes, increasing the rate at which they develop and also increasing the risk that we will have, because the hotter outside gets, what do? We try to shed as much clothing as possible, and by doing that, we expose more of our skin to bites from mosquitoes, so we increase our exposure to contracting dengue and Zika and all the other mosquito-borne diseases. So those are my opening shots, as Dr. Connell said. And mine is more of a one-day style rather than CP.
Dr. Campbell, let's see what style you play, sir. Your opening remarks.
Well, speaking as a psychologist, I think we know a lot about the short term impact of heat. We know, for example, that extreme heat is associated with increases in symptoms of depression and anxiety. It's associated with increased risk and frequency of suicide. And importantly, it's associated with increased risk of violence, all types of violence, violent crime, domestic abuse, and even political violence. There are studies correlating those with heat. But also, as we start to understand more about the longer term effects of climate change and global warming, we're beginning to wrestle with some other less obvious impacts, like concepts like eco-anxiety, the idea that particularly young people who are likely to see more of this play out in the future are less certain, less hopeful, more anxious about their futures. And even some longer term public health data. I was just looking this afternoon at a new study from NYU looking at this was in the States, older Americans across decades. And what they have shown is that heat exposure is associated with cognitive decline, particularly for people in poorer neighborhoods who are marginalized socioeconomically. So we know about short-term effects, but we're learning more about the creeping threats.
Okay. I'm going to bring this down to the basics as much as I can, because I think I mentioned this to a meteorologist or two. I remember very recently looking at the dashboard. They give their temperatures as something like 30, 32, 33, 31. I remember seeing something like 39 degrees on the dashboard on my vehicle. And I remember somebody had a picture of a 40 degree. But when it comes to seeing these kinds of things and experiencing them, like you said, you're AC, sometimes you're in the car, but then you have to get out, and you have to face it. And I mean, what we always talk about things like hydration, and anybody can go on this, Dr. Connell. Anybody can start on this. But what are some practical things that we can do outside of the typical hydration, and we can talk about what you should be hydrating with too. Well, that's important. But what are some of the other things that we can do in addition to hydration? And I also want to then get some input on the types of things we should be hydrating with.
Yeah, so I'm going to be very careful, because I know there's a psychologist on the panel, but this is really a behavioral change. It's not just about hydration and just going out there and trying to drink as much water as you can, which is a good thing. But what are some of the practical things that living in the heat we all need to do? Well, one thing is to avoid being in direct sunlight, because that certainly is going to have you a lot more heated up. So, for instance, I am notorious now for taking calls parked in the vehicle with the air conditioning on, because it's cooler, right? And I can speak there. That dashboard that you saw was probably a post on my Instagram page where I posted, look, I'm parked outside the Marriott's courtyard, and it's 40 degrees.
Wow.
I've never seen I didn't even realize it registered in the 40s, but it's 40 degrees outside. Then there are other things such as using technology. I am not a big water person by nature, but I know I need to keep drinking during the day, and I am likely to forget it because it's not something inherently in my DNA that I want to do. So I use my smartwatch, which is going to send me a vibration every 90 minutes to tell me it's time to drink some more water. Then there are the various apps on your smart devices that you can use to track how much water that you're actually consuming. So Ryan, heat is a big deal, and just to exemplify how much of a big deal it is, as an internist in my consultations with patients, the opening question after, I hope you didn't have any trouble getting here in traffic and all that, is how are you coping with the heat? And I really drill down into it. What steps are you taking to reduce sunlight exposure? Are you wearing sunblock? Are you reapplying sunblock? How are you keeping up on your water consumption? How do you know when you're hydrated enough? Of course, these questions are provocative, and some patients might say, I actually don't know when I'm hydrated enough. I just keep drinking, or I'm not sure if I'm drinking enough water. But they're conversations that the medical fraternity needs to have with patients, because we are in a space where heat is a major public health issue, and we have to think of practical ways of addressing this, even in the consultation for anything. So it's what is called in primary care as an opportunistic encounter. Someone comes into the office, maybe to discuss something totally unrelated. That's the opportunity for us to drill home some information on heat and managing heat.
Dr. Douglas?
Yes, I think heat definitely is a stress. Is a stressor to the body, physiological, psychological as well. And we will have to determine now what our new normal will look like in terms of our behavior, because everyone has their own particular level of comfort that works for them. But there are certain things that cut across regardless of where you are, and being hydrated is one of them. One thing that I would caution persons of doing, and I know I really enjoy, for instance, falling asleep with a fan on to keep cool. And in this heat, seems like a really practical example. But what I would caution them to do is to have a glass of water at the bedside so that they can during the night, because the fan being on you will dehydrate you very quickly, and that will then increase your risk of developing kidney stones. And I can attest to the very damaging and painful experience of having to pass kidney stones, whether you're male or female. So I would caution them in terms of also drinking the right type of water, because of our geological structure in Barbados being a karst island. Karst just means limestone. If you've been to Harrison's Cave, you will see how the water actually percolates down into the underground aquifers. That is a very vivid example. But you can see also that the deposits of calcium forming the stalactites and stalagmites, that can also form within your kidneys, along with other things, including your diet. If you eat a lot of red meat, etc., you can build these urinary stones in your kidney. And that is some really, really practical advice that I can offer persons from a more personal experience as it relates to the personal health. Then, if you look in terms of the environment, you have sargassum seaweed, which is a function of the elevated sea surface temperatures, and also the runoff coming off the coast of South America and also the coast of Africa that loads nutrients into the marine environment. And then, if you have seaweed, you have high heat, you have abundance of nutrients, then you're going to have a seaweed bloom. And that is what we've been experiencing over the last 5, maybe 10 years in the Caribbean, as that sargassum flows with the ocean currents in the Atlantic and also Caribbean Sea. So these are some practical things that we will start to have to develop coping mechanisms for, from an institutional but also personal.
Dr. Douglas, I want to get back to you on that fan comment, but before that, I'll let Dr. Campbell comment. No, he mentioned something. Dr. Campbell mentioned something very interesting about the agitation levels that people feel when they're heated. I mean, serious, you mentioned things like violence and all of that, and sometimes people might not even realize that that's what's triggering it. Just talk a little bit more about that and things that people should be aware of. I mean, we have things like heat stroke and all of that as well. Tell some of the things that people should be aware of when they could get to that agitated state very easily.
So I think it fits in with what my colleagues were saying in terms of thinking practically about how to take care of yourself. I should say, the statistics that I'm talking about in terms of association with violence are in big studies over a long period of time with lots of people. So, the actual risk for a single person might not be that great, but the risk for communities is significant. But having said that, for everybody to take care of themselves, I think it's important to be practical, to think about managing your own stress, to be aware, right, of the heat in a way that you can think ahead of time about how to manage your stress, how you're going to interact with the people in your life, even the people who maybe aren't so easy to interact with or who might cause you stress. When it's hotter, it just makes things that much. It turns up the volume, right, on your level of stress, and so you might need to think in a much more purposeful way about what you can do to take care of yourself. And I know Dr. Connell was talking about habits, and one of the things about reinforcing, starting, and continuing, maintaining good habits is to make them practical, workable, and pretty easy to do. So things like planning what you take to work, staying hydrated is a really crucial, basic thing for physical and for mental health, right? So making sure ahead of time that you can have access to what you need. And the other thing I would say is that not everybody is in the same living situation, social situation, or economic situation, right? And so there are lots of other issues that affect people's stress. And it's really important to plan in a practical, realistic way for where people are, and not, everybody needs to have solutions that fit for them.
Okay, we're coming up to break soon, but I want to touch quickly on the topic of innovation, because I'm realizing that a lot of people are now looking into, those who don't have them, looking into buying AC units. You have also the people are using fans, some multiple fans to keep cool at home. And is there room here for some kind of innovation to emerge really? Because all of these things invariably, we have some people who are tied into PV systems and so on, but some of these things also impact our intake, our uptake of oil and our oil use and so on. Is there room for innovation here?
There's certainly lots of room for innovation, but of course, innovation, as you mentioned or you hinted to, has implications on energy consumption, the type of energy that's being consumed. So, for instance, using solar-powered devices that allow for cooling is an innovation. It's also an investment. Also, the way homes are built, for instance, so that there's more shade, and so that at night, for instance, the walls aren't extremely hot and take forever to cool at night. These are kind of innovations in structural design that engineers will probably be looking at a lot closer. But I really liked the point made by my co-panelists about, all I will say is preparing for the night rest. And maybe, Ryan, that's something we can touch on when we get back from the break. But preparing for the night rest is something that's critical, because you don't think about, what do I do to stay hydrated overnight?
Yes, that's a good point to help me to break. And we'll be back with more discussion on this. Remember, you can join the discussion, 228-5562, 228-5563. We are back with the further discussion after this break. Welcome back to the People's Business Live. The topic, climate change, the heat and you. And the discussion is getting a little hotter here. And we're looking at things like what you can do, practical things that you can do at home in terms of innovation, because there's a recognition as well that not everybody can necessarily afford air conditioning. And so there's some practical things that we're also looking at right now in terms of cooling. Before I let you continue, Dr. Connell, this question will go out for the entire panel after you've concluded. Is there any research that UWI is leading, or is there any information available so far in terms of heat or climate change as it affects Barbados and Barbadians, or is that something that's in train? But I'll let you continue on your point first, Dr. Connell.
Sure. So I was going to say, preparing for the night's rest can seem like almost a whole planning episode. But it is difficult because at night you're very much at risk of even becoming dehydrated when you sleep. You don't think about that. As Kirk mentioned, the fan constantly on you can cause some dehydration as well. You may not have air conditioning, and so it's still warm in the room and you're sweating. And you're passing urine sometimes at night. Some people are on medication that may have them doing so. And you become dehydrated without even knowing it. And yet you wake up on mornings feeling extremely exhausted, having had a good night's rest, and not realizing how dehydrated you became. So here are some practical things that all of us should consider. One is having water available at the bedside and taking some sips of water, at least a glass full of water overnight. As you get up to use the restroom, make sure that you top up with water. Now is a good time also to pay attention to what color your urine is when you use the restroom. Before, I know many of us get up at night and our eyes are kind of half open when we are going to use the restroom, but it's a good opportunity for us to look at the urine to see whether it is clear, and all urine should be clear if you're pretty well hydrated. Whether it's becoming dark or if it's extremely dark, then you really do need to top up on water. Now, the reason I'm emphasizing this is because I know many people out there, especially in my specialty of high blood pressure, are actually on medicines that cause them to pass urine frequently to get rid of sodium or salt, and they're especially at risk of becoming dehydrated. Some people, of course, out there have a condition known as heart failure, where they're prescribed medications to reduce the amount of fluid that they have, and so they are at increased risk. Remember, these drugs were prescribed on the basis that the temperature outside is not as hot as it is, and that you're not losing all this additional water because of just the climatic factors around you. So preparing for bed is important. Now, something that we don't even consider is where the medicines being kept. This store at room temperature is not meant to be a room temperature of 32 degrees Celsius, right? And sometimes going up during the day, as we mentioned, up to 38, 39 in some enclosed spaces. So where you store your tablets, because you could be, for instance, storing them at a temperature that's going to affect the shelf life of the drug. So don't just decide, okay, I'm going to go to sleep. This is where water consumption stops. This is where I am less likely to be dehydrated. You need to consider all these factors as you rest at night. On mornings you get up, you may find yourself even more hydrated, and of course having to top up before going out on the rush hour traffic.
Okay, I think we have our first call. Good evening, caller. Please go ahead with your comment or question.
Hello, good night, panelists. My first
Good night.
Good night.
two questions I want to ask. How do you know that you are hydrated, which is one? And I have seen a text came to me where too much water can damage your body. Drinking too much water can damage your body. Can you answer those for me?
Sure. So we just mentioned looking at your urine, and I think Mike mentioned how as you get dehydrated, your mood can change. You might become a very angry moderator and trying to rush the panel along. Those kind of things can happen, right? But your brain is actually not the most sensitive organ to measure your hydration status, because you can become very dehydrated before your brain even sends signals to say, look, you're thirsty, drink some more water. This is especially so as we get older. We lose the ability to sense when we're thirsty. So don't rely on, I'm only going to drink when I'm thirsty. Also, your blood pressure is, if you are extremely dehydrated, this can be affected, but don't rely on your blood pressure, because that means that you're really dehydrated. And sometimes if you're dangerously so, you may need fluid quickly, like through an intravenous line and not just orally. The organs that are really great at telling you that you are hydrated or not hydrated are the period organs, the kidneys. They do a great job at either absorbing a lot more water if you are dehydrated, or asking or getting you to pass a lot more water if you are overhydrated. Now, the caller mentioned, can drinking too much water be bad for you? This is very unusual, and it would really be in select cases. I mentioned heart failure, where volume is important, so you can't kind of keep up too much on your water, and this is where discussion with your doctor is important, because you're between a rock and a hard place. Literally, you don't want to overhydrate to push yourself into heart failure. You don't want to be dehydrated so that your cardiovascular system is again under stress. So that's a difficult balance. Also, of course, there's some patients out there who have conditions where they may not sense when they're hydrated enough very quickly, and so you may have to regulate or actually quantify the amount of water that you need. But you know how hydrated you are by checking your urine. And if there's the one thing I want to leave tonight, is that all of us should be checking the color of our urine. It should be clear. We've become so accustomed to seeing yellow urine that we think that it's normal. In some circumstances where you are really exercising, like those of us who are brave enough, hopefully there's some on this panel, to attend the gym, right? When you're in the gym, that's a high risk point to become dehydrated. But some gyms have P charts that are right next to the urinals or even in restrooms, and it encourages you then to check the color of your urine. So we should all be checking our urine, and we should be topping up. By the time your urine is yellow, guess what? You are already dehydrated, and you need to top up even more. So my take home point is, listen very carefully to your kidneys. They usually do a great job at telling you before your brain or your heart that you're dehydrated.
We have another question. I'm going to just go straight to the caller. Good evening, good night, caller. Please go ahead with your comment or your question.
Good night to the panel. I wanted to find out, instead of drinking water, which is like frequent, what about taking, I'm just asking this, what about taking some ice cubes and like crushing them and sucking the ice? It can have some water in it, and sucking the ice, which will cut down on the amount of water you intake, as well as you're drinking water on a regular basis, and you're putting out all of whatever the fluids, whatever water contains. What then do you take to put back in what you're giving out?
Yeah, I seem to be getting all the questions. So remember, we said that the kidneys are really good organs at regulating water. And they're also pretty good organs at regulating the amount of sodium or salt that you're excreting as well. So you cannot kind of, on the very rare circumstances, kind of produce so much urine that you're losing all of these salt particles in your urine. That very rarely happens. One condition that this may occur in is, especially in marathon runners, where they're losing a lot of salt in their sweat as well. And so when they consume a lot of water, if you've ever watched a lot of the marathons, even in the United States, they get salt tablets in addition to water tablets. For the rest of us who are probably not out there running marathons, water consumption is safe and should be encouraged, unless you are on a restricted water, because, as I mentioned, conditions such as heart failure. Ice chips, of course, have a dual role, because you are consuming not only water, but you have the cooling effect of water as well from the ice chips. What we don't want, however, is for people to say, well, it's total volume. I'm going to include in that some beer, maybe a few rum and cokes during happy hour. And this is all going to count as my fluid, because yes, there is water there, and you probably will have some ice with your cocktail. However, alcohol actually does cause a lot of dehydration, because it does cause you to pee a lot as well, especially beer. And other close to my heart, although it probably shouldn't be, caffeine. If you drink a lot of coffee during the day, caffeine also causes you to lose a lot of fluid, so can also dehydrate you when you're drinking your coffee. And of course, there's caffeine in tea as well. So I think the takeaway point to the caller, however, is we all need to drink a lot more water and not be paranoid or skeptical about what's happening with the salt in our blood. Our kidneys do a pretty good job at regulating that.
Okay, Dr. Douglas, Dr. Campbell, I want to bring you back in quickly to just give us an idea of where the research side of this phenomenon is right now in terms of the heat.
Well, I can't necessarily speak in terms of Cave Hill at present, but I know that UWA Mona, for example, they have done a lot of work. Professor, his name escapes me now, but there's a group in Mona that's working on climate. They're part of the IPCC report for the last COP and of this COP as well. Um, they have done some excellent work. They're looking at climate departure, which is a new term that has been bandied around at present. Looking at temperature and the increase in temperature. So there's that work in terms of the atmospheric element of it. But I think maybe what the caller is referring to is what are then the extenuating impacts of heat on us as human beings living in Barbados, living in Jamaica, living in all the other Caribbean countries. I think now that is where our research in terms of where we want to target that we can perhaps look at. At the Center for Biosecurity Studies, what research we conducted that included temperature looked at wildfires in Barbados. So we looked to see what different climatic factors were were associated with the incidence of different wildfires, from rubbish fires to sugarcane fires to obviously the larger ones, grass fires on the island. And I know at this point in time of the year, we're not as concerned, but trust me, from January to April, we will start to see some increased activity. And that is actually based on what's happening right now, because all of this rainfall that we're experiencing is causing the vegetation to bloom, to grow. And then during the dry season, it dries out. And then we have massive amounts of dried vegetation around the island that once it's ignited, then it will just take off. So that is in terms of the research from, I believe, the UWI's end. But I would like to make one point, another practical example for persons. In terms of their routine, we speak about the nighttime routine, but even in your daytime routine, what you can do to adjust. For me personally, I like to hang my laundry on the outside. I like sun-dried laundry, but I recognize that I have to start that process way earlier. So I start maybe 4:35, get my stuff into the washing machine, hang them out by 5, or I mean 6:30, because I don't want to be in any 10 a.m. heat hanging out laundry. It is the most uncomfortable, and I don't think it is wise. So if you can start your laundry earlier, so you can hang it out earlier, weather permitting, of course, then I think that's also another practical example of how you can avoid heat stress. And even from your table and having your bread, because Barbadians, we love flour, we love our bread. Store your bread in the fridge to extend the life span of the bread, because in this heat the bread will go off a lot faster, right? So these are just some practical things that I myself have tried to implement to adjust to this heat.
Okay, Dr. Campbell,
Kirk,
going to
let me
bring you
just say
back
that
in. Oh, go ahead.
you're hanging out laundry. Impressive.
All right, Dr. Campbell, I'm going to bring you back in. We have to go to break, and we have a caller, but I'm going to bring you back in right after this break. We have to go to break. So bring you back in the discussion right after this break. Welcome back to The People's Business, where the topic tonight, climate change, the heat, and you. And I'm learning a lot tonight about just even practical things like having the fan on you, and it's really eye-opening. And I want to bring back in now Dr. Campbell, for his views on the discussion so far and any additional information that he can give us.
Well, you were asking about research initiatives in the Caribbean, and there are a couple of other things that are currently happening to do with mental health and climate change. I'm not aware of anything specifically about heat, but UE colleagues at St. Augustine and at Cave Hill are involved in the Changing World study as part of the Caribbean Climate Cares Initiative. And the first couple of papers associated with that research are coming out this year. And that has more to do with working collaboratively with young people, ages 18 to 24, in Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and I think we had some in Jamaica as well, looking at their hopes and fears and anxieties about the future. In light of what is happening in the Caribbean, which is more vulnerable than some other parts of the world to nearer term effects of climate change.
Okay, we go to our next caller. Good evening, good night, caller. Please go ahead with your comments or your question.
Hello, good evening. I want to say thank you very much for putting this topic on, but I'd like to address this question to Dr. Connell. In Barbados, we have a very high number of patients with chronic renal failure, and their fluid intake is very limited. How are you going to advise the persons who have such a small amount of fluid allotted to them between their dialysis treatments? How are you going to tell them? I heard one of the callers said about chips of ice, which we know is a way of giving some fluid, but still reducing it in a way. I want you to address how the persons with chronic renal failure on dialysis will manage in this heat. And my second question is to do with food security. And we know that in terms of protein, we always look to fish as a cheaper source of protein. But I have heard reports and seen on television, because of the heat in the water, the high temperature in water, that a number of the fish now are not available. The fishermen are going out, and they showed you the relation between getting fewer fish in your catch and the elevation of the price. And we know that with the elevation of the price is going to stop a whole lot of people from being able to purchase fish. What do we do in place of that?
Yeah, so those are two very interesting questions, because they actually spanned across this whole concept that we didn't have the opportunity to introduce, called the whole One Health approach to public health, and which suggests or which states that we are all one in terms of the environment, the animal kingdom, and humans. We like to think of ourselves as special in the animal kingdom, but when you think about it, we are the animals that were responsible for the progress of the whole climate change that we're experiencing. So anything that's affecting the environment, whether it's changes in the temperature, is going to affect what foods are available, the quality of the food available, the amount of food available, and we will certainly have to change our eating patterns as we move forward, as there may be some scarcity. So food security is important. I want to get back to the first question, because I think it's so important and it's relevant to lots of people listening, especially patients. The category that you mentioned, chronic renal failure, especially those people on dialysis, are one of the special groups I mentioned. I used the example of heart failure, but of course those patients who are on dialysis also have fluid restriction. It is reasonable to expect that you are not going to be able to consume as much water as if there was no limitation on your fluid intake. However, there are some things you could use to determine whether you are too dehydrated. One might be your blood pressure. So, for instance, if your blood pressure is starting to fall, you're also feeling very thirsty, or it's lower than usual, and you're feeling very thirsty and lethargic, and you haven't consumed water in the last 2-3 hours, maybe it's time for you to start drinking some water, even if you include some ice chips in there. These are real conversations that we should all be having with our healthcare providers. How do we kind of adjust because of the heat? For instance, does it mean because of the heat, and this happens every year in patients who live with high blood pressure, I have to take a lower dose of my water pill because I'm going to be losing fluid just because of the temperature outside? So maybe the diuretic, which is the drug that removes salt and water, needs to be reduced. And you're absolutely right, chronic renal failure on dialysis is one such thing. The other thing, the urine analogy that I used also assumes that obviously you're not on dialysis and you're passing normal urine. So looking at the color of your urine in the toilet bowl or in the urinal is critical. But obviously, if you're not passing the type of urine that you would expect normal kidneys to produce, i.e. you're on dialysis or you have significant renal impairment, then you're not going to be able to use color then as an indicator. So the short answer to that is keep checking the other signs. For instance, your blood pressure, how thirsty you are, and you may have to top up. But remember to discuss with your nephrologist or kidney doctor in the dialysis unit, and I know patients do this all the time. Do I need to adjust my oral intake because of the heat?
Okay, I have another caller on the line. Please go ahead, caller, with your comment or question.
Hello, yeah, good night to the panelists. Just a quick question. Is it better to use water straight from the tap or straight from your refrigerator? And also, is it okay to store water in a plastic bottle in your fridge? Thank you.
I was trying not to...
The panelists can go ahead with that one.
Well, what I would say is, again, my personal preference is really for bottled water. Tap water, because of the event that I had with my kidney stones, I find I cannot drink tap water without feeling the beginning stages of the event that I had. So that is because of the lime content or the calcium carbonate or magnesium carbonate levels that are in the water. And across Barbados, there are different levels. I reside in St. Philip. So in this part of Barbados, the lime is, very high. Lime levels in the water are very high. So I don't take any chances with it. And you can actually taste the difference between the water and tap water. Tap water is usually heavier because of the presence of the calcium carbonate. But I think the question that the caller was asking was related to the temperature. So you asked about tap water and you asked about fridge water from in the fridge. But I would defer to Dr. Connell as to whether or not cold water is better than room temperature water for hydration.
So, Kirk, I'm actually
would filtered water alleviate the problem, though?
Filtered won't, because filtered water uses activated carbon. Activated carbon is good at removing chemical pollutants in water, potential pollutants in the water, but it will not remove calcium carbonate.
Oh.
Calcium carbonate.
What you call calcium carbonate or magnesium carbonate. So when you boil the water in your kettle, you see a lime scale at the bottom over time, where that is what you will, because the heat actually causes it to precipitate out. It's still there, see it at room temperature, but when you boil it and you increase the temperature, you reduce this the solubility, and then it precipitates out.
So boiling would be a better option then? Boiling your water? No?
You have to distill it and then catch that water and then drink it. Wow. So that's what they use for bottled water. That's one of the processes they use. But they actually add back in salt, because if you drink pure water, your bones will actually get deglazed. You will actually start to pull the minerals out of your bones. So there's a whole process in terms of actually making bottled water. But it is a personal preference. Speak to your doctor. But I know that is a challenge because of the unique nature of Barbados and our water supply. That can be a challenge for some persons. But in terms of the temperature, some people don't like to drink cold water. Some people prefer room temperature water. But I would say don't come from directly out of the sun and go into the fridge and drink cold water. I don't think that's perhaps the smartest thing to do. But as I said, I would defer.
Let me just say, Kirk, that it's interesting because I've practiced in a few countries, and I have never seen any other country with an obsession about water temperature than Barbados. It is absolutely hilarious, but there is some science behind it, huh? So everyone has a preference. Some of us like room temperature water. Others of us prefer ice cold water. What you should not do is quickly drink a whole set of ice water because it does stimulate a nerve called the vagus nerve, which does have the effects of slowing your heart. In fact, sometimes it's a mechanism. Some of us who are accustomed of developing really fast heart rates, we might have been advised to drink ice cold water to slow our hearts down. But under normal circumstances, that's not something you want, right? So the aim is not to try to cool down as quickly as possible and maybe have a whole liter just drinking quickly, say I'm going to catch up. It doesn't work like that. But if you are going to drink cold water, it's always a good idea to drink it slowly. The chill doesn't have to go directly to every cell in your body. Drink slowly and make sure that you are comfortable with drinking, and don't try to drink a large volume of water. Uh, you're not going to get less hydrated any faster. So water temperature is a preference, and I have to admit I am more a room temperature person. Except if I'm outside and it's extremely hot, then I would prefer not too cold but chilled water. The interesting question about storage of water in plastics, I'm not sure if Kirk touched on it or wanted to touch on it, but there has been a lot of talk about the phosphates content in uh, plastic bottles and storing it for prolonged periods of time under refrigeration. So those are things you might want to look out for or consider and discuss as well moving forward. We spend a lot of time talking about kidney stones. Now, remember, most of us out there watching this program are not like Kirk, who are genetically at risk as well of developing calcium stones, or even like myself with gout and who are predisposed to get uric acid stones. The vast majority of us, though, can consume tap water. Now, there's some important things to consider. For instance, if you are on medication that might precipitate kidney stones, such as the same water tablets I was speaking about, then maybe you need to have a conversation with your doctor. I'm sure Kirk is going to highlight this with his doctor anytime he starts any medication relating to removal of water, because it will put him at risk of developing kidney stones. So if you have had kidney stones, that's a conversation to have. But don't leave with the impression that all of us out there are at risk of developing kidney stones. It's not that common, and you can drink your tap water to hydrate.
We have to go to break, but we have some calls. Calls are coming in fast and furious. Please bear with us. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the People's Business. The topic tonight, climate change and you. And we're going to go straight to our callers on hold. Caller, please go ahead with your comment or question. Good night. Please go ahead with your comment or question.
I've been hearing from childhood, right, about air pollution, things like the Sahara dust and smoke and that kind of stuff, and the link with it with asthma. So, but does air pollution have any other health effects?
That's an interesting one, but we're going to hold the comments. We're going to take our last caller as we head into the home stretch here. Caller, please go ahead with your comment or question. Good night.
Yes, good night, sir. My question is, what is the best method of drinking water? Should you stand or should you sit? Should you drink large amounts at any one time or should you sip it?
All right. Thank you, caller. Gentlemen, like I said, we're into the home stretch. So either of you can incorporate your answers to accommodate the answers to the questions that were just posed, or you can wrap up in your own way in terms of the context of the discussion. I mean, we probably need 2 hours or something like this because we didn't get into a lot of things like agriculture, just briefly, and some other areas. But your final comments, I'm going to start with you, Dr. Connell.
Right. So position is not that important for drinking water. It doesn't get absorbed any fast depending on whether you're standing or sitting. Obviously, drinking water laying flat is not a good idea. But you should drink small quantities, which is what I think the caller kind of insinuated, that smaller quantities more frequently. So every 2 hours or so, most of these smartwatches, they send the alarm off to drink some water. Drink slowly. It is not a sprint. It's more of a marathon throughout the day to stay hydrated at set points. I like the question about smoke because we have been speaking a lot about heat, and we always speak about smoke and the respiratory illnesses such as asthma and other respiratory diseases. But many of us don't realize that smoke has small particles that actually increases your cardiovascular risk or your risk for heart attack and stroke. So this is something we seriously need to think about, especially during the bushfire seasons, because our air quality, and we know this from examples in the north, remember we had the smoke coming from Canada into New York. Air quality influences cardiovascular events. The events rates for stroke and heart attacks increase because of the inflammation that it causes. So this is a whole separate discussion. So yes, we are where we live. And my closing points, I'm going to incorporate: drink water. It is reasonably safe to drink tap water. Make sure that you're drinking consistently and that you're checking your urine religiously.
Okay. Dr. Douglas?
Yes, and I want to also support Dr. Connell in tap water is safe for persons to drink right across Barbados. I don't want persons to go away with the impression that Dr. Douglas is saying that tap water is not fit for drinking. That is not true. Is your personal preference what you want to drink. Even desalinated water as well. Some questions may come up regarding desalinated water. It is just as good as the normal water that's abstracted from the underground aquifers as well. There's no problem. The important thing is to have some water to remain hydrated. As it relates to air pollution, yes, there's not the only threat in terms of asthma, where air pollution is concerned. You have wildfires that can be a source of air pollutants, but you also have vehicular traffic, vehicular emissions, and also in terms of even within your home environment, you could also have air pollution. There's new research coming out in terms of utilizing gas stoves and also the other indoor air pollutants that you will be exposed to that can influence your health. Diabetes as well, your risk for diabetes is also influenced. And there's a particular metric that they use, the particulate matter that Dr. Connell had made mention of, is particulate matter 2.5, the very small, fine particles that go into your lungs, cross the lungs into your blood, and actually cause inflammation. And that's how it increases your risk for all of the other cardiovascular and also your risk for diabetes. So breathe is also important, but the important takeaway, I believe, from this session is that our health, that human health, animal health, and the environment is very critical. It's not one and the other, but it's all three combined together that we have to manage effectively.
Okay, and Dr. Campbell, you astounded me when you started off with the fact that this thing agitates us and so on, and we just had COVID, which is an agitator, and now we're dealing with another agitator. How much agitation can we take? Well, your closing comments, sir.
Well, we have short-term agitation, and we probably have some longer-term agitation as climate change, evolves over the longer term. But I think that, and we touched on it briefly, and Kirk just touched on it too. I think that the thinking about things in terms of One Health is really useful. That's why a psychologist would also recommend that you drink water, even though we don't normally work in that area. But the fact is that your physical health and your psychological health and your stress and your social health and your home environment and your work environment are all interrelated. Just like we are connected to the systems and the places that we live. So all of our physical and mental lives play out in our environments, and the choices that we make about our behavior also have a big part in not only helping us cope, but potentially mitigating environmental threats in Barbados and outside of Barbados.
Okay, well said. And that's where we wrap up. But, just to reinforce the points here that we're in this extremely unprecedented territory where heat is concerned. Everyone on this panel has consistently said, hydration is important. Do what you can to hydrate. There are things at home, as they said, just to reinforce and to remind you that you can do in terms of your cooling approaches. I think Dr. Douglas even mentioned things like hanging out clothes. And I smiled at that one because I was hanging out clothes, I believe, just yesterday, and the sun was scorching my toes. I think that was something like close to midday or midday sun. So, I mean, there are things that you can do. And that one about hanging out your clothes, starting your wash cycle earlier in the day, that's one that I definitely have as a takeaway from tonight. And so just generally, I would want to urge Barbadians, we are seeing the higher temperatures. Dr. Connell, he alluded to it, just kind of like whimsically, but, that these may be the cooler times that we're seeing because we don't know what we're going to be facing in the future. So I would advise everyone to be careful, to be cautious out there, and to do everything you can to protect yourself and keep yourself cool. And just want to thank my panelists again, Dr. Kenneth Connell, the Deputy Dean, Recruitment and Outreach, Faculty of Medical Sciences, UWI Capefield Campus, Dr. Kirk Douglas, Director, Center for Biosecurity and Studies at the UWI, Dr. Mike Campbell, Clinical and Behavioral Psychologist, Deputy Dean, Research and Postgraduate Studies, Faculty of Medical Sciences at the UWI Capefield Campus. I want to thank all of my panelists and thank you, the viewers, for calling in tonight. Sorry that we couldn't take all of your calls, but this has been The People's Business, where the topic has been climate change, the heat, and you. Do have a good night. I'm your presenter, Ryan Brew.